Hello, my name is Alice and I'm a knitter from South Africa. Welcome to part 2 of Almost Everything I Knit. If you want to watch part 1, you can find it on my YouTube page, and please enjoy watching everything I knit in 2023 and 2024. Moving on to 2023, I knitted 14 objects. One of these was a top. 6 of them were accessories and 7 of them were sweaters. I knit 8 gift knits during this year and 6 sweaters for me. I also had 2 frogged items during this year that I'll touch on briefly. The first finished item of 2023 was this head warmer for my sister. This is a piece that she requested because she just wanted her ears to be kept warm in the winter months. I did gift this to her in our summer months, but she did get some wear out of it in the following winter. This, I believe, was a free pattern on Ravelry, or potentially quite an affordable paid pattern. It's knit up in fisherman's rib, and then there's a twisted detail that you do at the end when you're sewing it together. This was knit up in drops puna and then 1 strand of a mohair fibre. This mohair might be African Expressions or it might be drops, I can't really remember. The next project that I worked on is a very funny project. This is some office socks that I made for my husband. And the main intention for this piece was just to have a bit of a novelty piece and for him to have a bit of a laugh. We are both big fans of The Office, and I saw this pattern on Ravelry. It's one of Knitting Lotte's mitten patterns. So I bought her pattern and then just modified the colorwork chart to put it on these socks. These are knit up in African Expressions Soul and Cowgirl Blues Merino Twist. I find that with the African Expressions Soul, it's a much lighter sock yarn than other sock yarns, and this does give some issues when knitting it with colorwork. I won't say that I'm disappointed with that at all with these socks, because these are mainly just a fun piece for my husband to wear around the house. But you can see my floats poking through quite significantly at the back, and I think that's because the weight of the African Expressions Soul is so much lighter. I do try to catch my floats every second or third stitch when knitting socks, because I think that with socks you really don't want your toes catching on the floats as you put your feet into the sock. What I think I'll do going forward is either knit socks in African Expressions Soul or knit them purely in a different sock fibre and not try to combine the two when doing colour work. I then went on to knit the Svensen Sweater for my brother. My brother is a very broad-shouldered, tall human, and this sweater was easily 3 times bigger than a sweater that I would make for myself. I wasn't too keen on knitting a large sweater or potentially an extra large sweater flat. So I decided to modify the Svensen Sweater so that I could make it into a top-down raglan sweater knit in the round. I did reach some hiccups with this because the pattern isn't really written with this sort of construction in mind, but I did eventually manage with it. The one big issue when making the sweater was that my brother doesn't live nearby, and not many people who are near me are as big as him, and they don't have as broad shoulders, so I did have to guesstimate a bit with the sizing. One of the other issues that I had with this piece is that I chose to make it in a navy African Expressions harmony. So I don't have any pictures of the finished garment here, but I do have some pictures of the garment in construction. What I found happened with the African Expressions harmony is that because it's a superwash fibre, it can't really hold up the weight of the garment. And you'll see that I mentioned that with a few other superwash fibres. So because it's a cable knit, quite large sweater, the weight of the garment is significant, and it tended to pull out and stretch out the cables at the top of the sweater. I think that this garment doesn't get any wear or very minimal wear, and I'm really trying to get my brother to bring it back so that I can re-knit it into something a bit more wearable. I would hate to let all of this yarn go to waste, and I think that there are some other sweater constructions that won't lead to as much sagging. I then knit on some opal socks for my brother's wife, which were quite a basic construction and very similar to my husband's socks. The next piece that I knit on was also a men's sweater, and this I think is quite an ideal pattern for a men's sweater. This is the single melt sweater, and this is knit up in Drops Nepal or Drops Alaska. Due to the fact that it's quite thick yarn, it makes the sweater go by quite quickly considering it's a men's sweater, and I enjoyed making this piece. It's got a very nice raglan stitch design over here. I did add some elastic to the neckline over here, and I think that helps it to feel a bit more polished. One thing I have found in the past few years is that I used to be quite resistant to adding elastic into the neckline of my sweaters. For some reason, I really felt that I wanted the sweaters to be purely knit, and I didn't want to add that much sewing into the garments or to add any augmentation. And I'm not really sure where that feeling came from, but in recent years I've actually started adding elastic to most of my sweaters, and I think that it just gives them a much nicer look. I just use a single strand of sewing elastic. After that single melt sweater, I made a teeny tiny preemie newborn sweater. This was made in some African Expressions Harmony, and this was a really fun knit to make. It knit up in probably a couple of hours because it's a worsted weight fibre, and the jersey was the smallest thing I've ever made. This was for some friends who were having a preemie baby in winter, and there wasn't really any clothing in the shops that would fit a premature baby. It was nice to be able to give them something that would fit their baby a bit better for the weeks before it grew into bigger items. I also think that African Expressions Harmony was the ideal fibre for this. It's really soft, and I can't imagine making something scratchy for a baby. My next sweater was my wedding ranunculus. This is a sweater that I made myself for my wedding day, and this is quite a modified ranunculus sweater. I knit this up from a cone of Jamieson and Smith, and I held 2 strands together for this. This is quite a dense fabric. We were getting married in winter, and I knew that I wanted something to keep me warm, but I still wanted to show off my dress. So I made this very cropped, and it's a bracelet length design. I find that this isn't something that really gets anywhere since my wedding day. I've put it on a handful of times, but it's so cropped that it doesn't really even work with high-waist jeans. It hit perfectly with my wedding dress because it stops just at the waistline of the dress, but it stops too short for high-waist jeans, and I think I do need to make a couple of alterations to this. The second issue is that I don't really wear anything that's a bracelet length, so I'm considering lengthening the sleeves. Initially for my wedding sweater, I wanted to knit up the George's cardigan. I knitted most of the sweater and then frogged it back because as I was trying it on, I realized that the mohair was getting on everything around me. I don't think that my husband would have appreciated having mohair all over his suit in all of our wedding pictures, so that's why I decided to go with something that didn't have any mohair so that there would be no risk of transferring those fibres. I then knit the Ingrid sweater by Petite Knit. This is knit up in 2 strands of Drops Flora held together, and I think I knit this up on a 3.5mm needle. I really enjoy this design, and I think that the neckline especially is quite fun. I haven't seen many other pieces with this neckline, and I think that it really makes the piece stand out and look quite unique. It's also one of the few boxy, oversized fits that I have in my wardrobe, and I do like having that piece of variety. In terms of mistakes that I made with this piece is I didn't realize that this was a faux cable, and I wasn't really reading the pattern properly at the time that I was doing this. So I did proper cables for all of these cable sections, and I think that this makes the fabric a lot tighter and takes away a lot of the drape in those sections. If I knit this again, or I should say when I knit this again, I will definitely do the faux cables for those sections, and hopefully the drape from these 2 sections will match the drape in that faux cable area. While I loved this piece initially, it's not something that gets that much wear anymore. I find that the Drops Flora just hasn't worn that well with time. Initially it looked very fresh and very new, but I think that the fibre has started to look quite old within the last year. It does have lighter bits of fibre that tend to stick out and tend to pill a bit. And even after de-pilling this garment, I don't find that it has that fresh and new feel anymore. I then went on to knit my first little summer knit. This is knit up in the same green DK Cowgirl Blues merino that I knit my mum's Nicolene sweater in. So this is what I have left over from this piece. And I was initially quite happy with this piece, but it did stretch out very quickly because it's a superwash yarn. And I also think that I probably made it a bit too cropped. On top of that, I've since knit a lot more summer pieces, and I've realized that this look isn't really something that I wear that often. What I'm thinking of doing is ripping this back and potentially making this into a May camisole. I'll just need to look through my stash and see if I've got a little bit more of this fibre hanging around. Or potentially I could do a striped May camisole with these two fibres striped with some white. I then knit a market bag for one of my friends. This was in quite a fun mix of some yellow and some pink cotton. It's also nice making an accessory as a gift because you don't have to worry about the piece fitting that person. 2023 was the year that I pulled my cuffs for my Kufel sweater out of my stash and finally knitted up the socks. I had a little bit of this Karoo Moon sock fibre left to knit up both the toe and the heel. You can see that I ran out right at the end here and finished off with some pink. I tend to knit my socks at the same time. I usually have both socks on the same cable, and that means that I'm able to tell when I'm running out and I can still make the socks match each other exactly. After knitting up those socks and revisiting my Kufel sweater, I was inspired to knit up another fingering weight sweater. This was some fingering weight yarn that I'd had in my stash for a while. I had visited the Cowgirl Blues workshop where they did a dyeing expo. So once a month, I think it's on the first Saturday of the month, they often invite people over and you can go and knit and have some tea. While I was there, I saw this beautiful yellow and pink yarn and bought their last 3 skeins of it. You can see that the skeins are from different dye lots. So in this section, there's a lot more purple, while at the top, there's very little purple. And this is especially apparent on the back here. I don't think that anyone would notice this if I hadn't pointed it out. And I am quite happy with this piece. I did have to modify the design a fair amount because my gauge was much tighter than the original Oslo sweater. So I just did some maths and managed to add in more stitches in each section so that I could knit this up on a fingering weight. I was playing yarn chicken with this piece, and that's part of the reason why I added in these contrast cuffs and the contrast neck. I also think that the sweater was looking a little bit plain without having a bit of interest in it. I picked up this mohair, which is from Adele's Mohair, at one of my yarn stores. And I think that this was a custom order and they just had the single ball left. The owner of the yarn store gave me quite a good deal on this yarn because there was just one skein, and I think it's a really fun colour to work with. In November of that year, I finished my Badger and Bloom sweater. Please ignore the teeny tiny stain on the front here. This is going in the wash today, but this is a really lovely piece. This is knit up in Drops Nepal, and then I held it with some African Expressions mohair. I did make some modifications to it. With my spot sweater, also by Anne Wenzel, I found that the yoke was very deep, and while I grew to like that with that sweater, I didn't want many sweaters with a very deep yoke. From what I remember, the short row shaping happens under the colourwork section and then you separate for the sleeves. What I decided to do for this sweater was to build the short row shaping into the sweater. So you'll see that these two sections are quite a bit wider, and I did the turns for the German short rows on the side of the arm here. I then did the sleeve separation a bit earlier in the colourwork section, and you can see that the colourwork is then separate on the sleeves and the body. I do think that this led to quite a nice effect with this garment. It did take a bit of trial and error to work on how to do that while still keeping the colourwork looking uniform. This is also something that I think would be a fairly good gift knit because it is a quicker knit. The last garment that I made for 2023 was a hipster hat that I made for my mom. I used some hand spun fibre, which was in quite an interesting colour. It was a mix of pink and green, which had been dyed in the wool, and I hand spun this on a Turkish drop spindle. Finally, moving on to 2024, my most recent year of knitting. In this year, I had 15 finished objects. 5 of them were gift knits and 10 of them were for me, so I've become a much more selfish knitter with time. I made 6 sweaters, 6 accessories and 3 tops during this year. I think that this was a year where I had a lot less time to spend on knitting. I'm interested that I have as many finished objects in 2024 as I had in 2023. I started off the year knitting gift knits for my brother and his wife. For both of these I knit Oslo hats, and I think that I altered the gauge a bit for both of them. This is knit with Rowan tweed and this is with, I think it's called Rowan alpaca silk. My next item was my fairy bouquet sweater. This is very different to the pattern. The pattern recommends that you knit this in a much lighter yarn. I think it's with 2 strands of mohair or 2 strands of alpaca held together. My version is quite a dense knit and definitely more of a winter garment. This is knit up in 1 strand of African Expressions Enchanted, which is more on the DK side, and then I held it with 1 strand of a lace weight yarn by Miss Lamotte. Miss Lamotte has some really nice hand-dyed yarns, and I think that the effect of having the hand-dyed yarn mixed with the undyed yarn looks quite nice. You get the speckling of pink, blue and some greens throughout the garment. This matches the theme of fairy bouquet quite nicely. This is a round yoke, but the most striking design element of the sweater is the sleeve along here. I really shot myself in the foot with this one. I finished the sweater and I was super excited to see the finished garment, and I'd become quite comfortable throwing things into my washing machine to spin out before blocking. So I blocked this for a while, soaked it in water, and then picked up the soggy lump of fibre and put it into my washing machine on the spin cycle. What I'd forgotten to do is you're meant to squeeze out as much water as possible when you put something in the spin cycle, and it's not meant to be a very wet garment that gets spun. So this came out of the washing machine completely felted. I was really upset, and all of the detail on the sleeves here had been lost. And at first I thought that it might still be a wearable piece, but the more I looked at it, the more I just felt disappointed that all of this hard work had gone to waste. I decided to rip out the garment while it was still damp, and I hung up the pieces of yarn to dry, and then I re-knit the whole thing. I think that this was definitely the right choice for this piece. This is a piece that I wear really frequently. In May of 2024, I knit up another tiny baby jersey in this beautiful pink yarn from Cowgirl Blues. The next piece from 2024 was my camisole number 5. This is by My Favorite Things Knitwear. You'll see that there's a bit of a theme with my camisoles where they tend to sit on the more scratchy side. I haven't been that successful with picking out the right yarn for a camisole. What I found myself doing was that I would test the fibre against my cheek to see if it felt soft enough, and I've since realised that my cheek isn't necessarily a good indicator of whether a camisole is going to be scratchy. I've seen some people knit up a swatch of the fabric and then they put it into a t-shirt and wear it against their chest for a few hours, and that's definitely what I'm going to do in my upcoming knits this year. This piece still gets a lot of wear. I really like the colour. It's an emerald green colour with some petrol blue in it. This is knit up in Sashinmaya Merino Yak, and I think just listening to the name I should have known that this would be a scratchy fibre. With that said, it does hold its shape really nicely and it does have some negative ease. I find this a really nice piece to wear out, and it does look quite fancy and quite posh when I'm wearing it. I still wear this during the day on cooler days, but definitely not on hot days. My next piece was finished in 2024, but I only just done the final adjustments on it last night. This is an altered version of the Oslo hat. Basically, I used the same construction principles as the Oslo hat, but I changed the gauge completely. This is knit up on African Expressions Adore, which is somewhere around an Aran worsted weight yarn. This is a blend of merino and mohair and is quite a warm fibre. This hat used almost exactly one skein of African Expressions Adore, and the main reason I made it was basically to try out that fibre without buying a sweater weight. One of my very few gift knits of 2024 is this cream anchor sweater. This is a petite knit pattern which is knit up in 100% merino in a superwash fibre. The reason that I have this in my wardrobe, seeing as it's a gift knit from the middle of 2024, is because I told my friend to bring it back to me if she wanted some elastic in the neckline, and she's brought it back for me to sew that in. In 2024, my mom asked me to help her to knit a jersey in the round, and we decided to knit the sweater in tandem. So we both have our own versions of the sweater knit in exactly the same yarn. It was a really fun project to work on a sweater like this with her. It also meant that she could do some more advanced design elements than what most beginners would be able to do. So we decided to add in some German short row shaping just under the neckline, because I really don't like sweaters to ride up at the front of my neck, and I wouldn't want to gift something to someone else where the sweater feels quite uncomfortable. We added in short row shaping just above the yoke, and then we would wait for each other at certain sections. So if she had finished the yoke, she would wait for me to catch up, and then we would do the sleeve separation together. We would work down the sleeves, and then we cast off together. My next piece is my May camisole, which I spoke about more in depth in my first podcast. And this is made in a Mara Bellissimo. This is quite a nice pattern. Once again, the yarn is quite scratchy, but this is something that I'm going to make again in the future in a much softer yarn. I then made my Cumulus blouse. This is in 2 strands of African Expressions mohair. I think that this garment is quite interesting. If worn with the right combination, it can look really lovely and quite expensive looking or quite fancy, but it really needs to be styled correctly. If I wear this with the wrong thing, it can also look very frumpy and very shapeless, so I do have to put a bit of consideration into this piece when I decide to put it on. The nice thing about this is that it folds up really tiny and it doesn't weigh much at all. So when I go traveling, it's nice to have this garment with me because I can sneak in an extra item into my suitcase without adding much bulk or much weight. In September of 2024, I knit up this sole camisole. This is knit up in 2 strands of crazy Zauberball yarn, and I got this on holiday when I was overseas with my husband. This is a really fun, crazy looking yarn, and I held 2 strands of it together for this top. Once again, this sits more on the scratchy side of things. I think I've learned a lot of lessons about camisoles in 2024, and I hope that I won't run into this issue in the future. With that said, I really like the colour of this piece, and I do still enjoy wearing it, even if it does get a bit scratchy in the summer. This is my rust coloured Paloma sweater. This is knit up in Miss Lamotte Rustwork Ravages, and once again I'm pretty sure that this is a superwash fibre. I made the final alterations to this week. Initially this was a mock neck design, and I found that because it's superwash, again it couldn't really hold up the weight of the garment, so the neckline started looking very stretched out. I then did a chain of crochet along the bottom part of the neckline here, and it does lose some of that stretch around the neckline, but I'm still able to put it on and take it off quite easily. That means that the chain of crochet is holding up the weight of the sweater instead of the ribbing having to do that job. I then tacked down the ribbing so that it's no longer a mock neck, and I put some elastic into the top here to really cinch it in. It's a raglan sweater with quite a loose body, and then it's got a design element of twisted rib running down the arm here into the sleeve. In November of 2024, I knit my second spot sweater, and this isn't one that I have with me right now because this was also a gift knit for my mom. My mom is an extremely knit-worthy person, as is most of my family, which is quite lucky for me. So I knit this up in a variety of different fibres. I wasn't as consistent with this one as I was with my first one. So in the first iteration of my scrappy spot sweater, I was quite careful about using 1 strand of lace weight and 2 mohair strands, or 3 mohair strands at a time. With my mom's version, I was a bit more playful. I used some double knit here and there, I used some bulky mohair for certain sections, and this leads to a change in texture of the background fabric. What I'm hoping to do is to film a more in-depth discussion about the spot sweaters later on. But briefly, one of the other alterations that I made for this garment was that instead of trying to match the sleeves and the body quite carefully when I separated for the sleeve, instead I knitted as one large tube and then I staked at the underarms and sewed those together. At some point in 2024, I also knit up this little green beanie. This was meant to match my husband's fisherman's rib beanie. I haven't worn this much because I think that I just didn't leave enough space for the brim. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and add about 5 centimeters more length to the brim here. At the moment, this has a very hipster look, and I do think that's cool on other people, but I don't really think it's a look that suits me very well. My final 2 garments of 2024 were some scarves. The first one is this garter necktie. And this is just a basic garter necktie with I-cord on either side. This is knit up with some yarn that I got from New Zealand, which is Polworth yarn. And this was a very, very quick make. I think I knit this up in about 2 days. And I basically just knit until I had half a ball left, and then I switched to decreases. I'm actually knitting up an exact replica of this at the moment as a gift knit for one of my family members. The second scarf that I worked on is the super cozy neck scarf, or that's my name for it. This is a self-drafted pattern, but it's very heavily inspired by Garn of Slick's scarf pattern. They have one that's made in alpaca 3, just like this, also a fisherman's rib, but theirs has a much more organic style when looking at the increases and the decreases along the bottom. I wanted mine to have straighter edges, so I didn't go with their pattern, but I did like the effect that they got with the yarn and the fisherman's rib. This is quite an expensive yarn, and the other issue is that I bought this while traveling and I haven't been able to access this yarn since then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions about any of the pieces, please send me a message or drop a comment below. I have really enjoyed talking through all of these pieces, and I love having some time to really get into the nitty-gritty of every knitted item. This is definitely a longer format video, but I am hoping to do some more podcasts and talk about my 2025 knitted items as the year goes. Bye!